Behold, a blessing! Or a curse, entirely possible. News for Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2. And well, considering how the previous iteration of the game was strangled in its crib like an undeserving baby, although having seen the game itself, I think it was more than deserving of it, I'm not entirely sure whether or not it has a particularly bright future. But now, after the original project was thoroughly a new developer has taken over the battered and scattered pieces and are going to try and put them together into something resembling a video game. Whether or not they succeed, I'd give them long odds, frankly, but there are some interesting little things they're doing here. So we're going to have a little look at the trailer here, where we are going to get a little bit of the new information. Paradox, of course, will be trying to salvage this project as they have put a fair bit of money into it, and the new developer is the Chinese Room. Now, they're most famous for, well, walking simulators and Amnesia: A Machine for Pigs, which was nearly universally despised, actually, as it seemed to fail with, well, most of the Amnesia audience in that it too was mostly a walking simulator. This is less than necessarily good, I would say, but here's the thing. The Chinese Room have managed to do one thing, if nothing else, and that is to create fairly atmospheric worlds. After all, if you're going to make an entire game, quote-unquote, where all you do is walk from point A to point B, the journey had better be damn good. And a lot of the premiere point of Vampire the Masquerade, the original, was the story, the atmosphere, the feel of it all, the characters and how they all interacted. If this is indeed a company that focuses heavily on atmosphere and storytelling, they might actually be ideally suited to making a good vampire game. Though they are going to need some actual action in there too, and to be fair, it's not like developers can't break their established molds ever either, and if there is a game in which a fairly short self-contained story might work, this could be it. So one of the major changes they are making from the original is that you are not quite in the same position, a power vacuum in the vampire court. So clearly, something has happened at the top of Vampire Society's leadership in this area, Seattle, I think, we'll see it in a moment here, that has decapitated them. Ah yes, a three-front siege on Seattle. And so what do the vampires do? Well, the various leaders of the vampire clans comes together to awaken an elder, which appears to be you. Now that is a pretty damn serious deviation from the plot of the original game, and I'm talking about the previous Bloodlines 2 here rather than the original, where they seem to be following the introduction of the first game, in that you were a freshly turned vampire and a court was arranged to see what would be done about you and your sire. Making you an elder, well, that turns all of that on its head and introduces a whole heaping heck of a lot of interesting little suggestions. Now, I'm thinking I might want to do a What is an Elder episode on the Lore channel this week, because it is a bit of a wider point than you might think, and oh god, I can't help myself. I know this is probably going to be absolute garbage, 98% chance, but it's a sequel to one of the best RPGs ever. I can't help but being a little hopeful, you know? And, because, okay, an elder. What is an elder, to give you the brief idea? Well, in the European context, it's usually a vampire that is very old, like 300, 400, 500 years old. Very old, very, very, very powerful. In the American context, however, well, they're probably still some of the biggest dogs around, but they're usually younger. Maybe 100, 150 odd, perhaps, 200 being the upper end of the scale. Though, of course, there's nothing preventing you from being a significantly older one either, but what remains the same is that when an elder is awoken, oh, that will shift the power balance severely, and it might very well be that the Vampire Society, having been decapitated somehow, figures that this is a good way to re-establish order, and it could open up a whole heap of a lot of intriguing options and intrigues there. For example, when you awaken, how the hell do you know who these people are? Maybe some of them used to be your enemies, maybe some of them used to be the spawn, that's not the correct word, the children, of one of your your enemies may be, and you don't know who your friends are. Why were you brought back? Was it a communal decision? Who can you trust? Who has your best interest in mind? Do any of them? Or are they simply trying to use you as a fresh piece in their puzzle? As you will be a fish out of water, you are going to have zero knowledge of the intrigues currently going on. There is a lot of cool storylines you could spin around that, and here is perhaps the most intriguing thing. It means you can be a goddamn badass. Now this looks interesting to me. So again, they kind of mentioned the idea of the intrigue here, which I do think will be an excellent thing, but man, one of the real, wow moments in the original Vampire for me was a scene in a nightclub where you are sent there to hustle some owner of the nightclub, some local gang lord or crime syndicate big boy, whatever, and he's like, who do you think you are? And he pulls out a gun and he shoots you, and it does nothing because you're a motherfucking vampire. Like, that was one of those moments where I was like, I'm a vampire. I'm a goddamn vampire. So there are several moments like that throughout the original where your mind kind of clicks in that you are the monster in the dark. You're not afraid of whatever's hunting you. Whatever's hunting you should be afraid of you. And it does something magical to the experience. So getting into it with a bit of a higher power level, I actually think could be a brilliant decision. Especially if you're going to do a little bit of a shorter, more self-contained story. To return to that point, the Chinese Room have experience in storytelling, clearly, but in very different sorts here. And their one saunter into a larger story, A Machine for Pigs, was not very well received at all. So their chops as to whether or not they can create a large-scale game might be questioned. And, well, even if they could make a good large-scale game, remember what they're working with here. They're still claiming this game is going to come out next year, mind you, which means that they must have maintained a fair bit of the original's meat. And indeed, the graphics as well the overall style and delivery of it all is rather reminiscent of the original, meaning that they can't simply have thrown everything on the pile and set it on fire. They must still be working with significant portions of the original product, which means in turn that they might have to deal with a lot of the previous teams, that is, established ideas, lore, executions, environments, etc., and they need to kind of re-rig it in a way that makes sense for this new storyline, in which case they are going to be severely limited with the tools they're going to work with, and if they only got a year to produce new assets, well, your best bet might simply be to take what was maybe a 10-20 hour story, and then snip, 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 and create rather a shorter but better overall experience. And it could work on the one hand. If it is done well, if it is actually a great story, then even if it's 5 hours long, my biggest complaint at the end will probably be that it's too short. It's sort of like, imagine a Cyberpunk Edge Runner scenario, right? Where my main complaint about that series was that it wasn't long enough. There was a lot of room to establish more of the characters, character, frankly, to build up more of the world and give it you even more invested in everybody. Another hour or two would have made a genius show absolutely brilliant. But the reverse point is, of course, that if they feel forced to recreate that 10-20 hour scope without the resources to do so, in all due likelihood, you're going to hit like the midway point and you're just, what the hell happened? Suddenly the writing quality took a dump, the animation quality took a dump, they don't even have voiced cutscenes anymore. It's like an anime that suddenly runs out of budget. Suddenly the art goes to shit. Suddenly they're using still cuts for everything. Suddenly the voice acting sounds subpar, etc. That is the danger, of course, and this is an assumption, mind you, but it does make a fair bit of logical sense, assuming again that they do need to work with a lot of the previous bones of the structure they've been entrusted with. who knows? Like, I do believe that is probably a realistic scenario, and in that case, making a little bit more of an action-focused kind of push, and then instead move some more of the intrigue into the background via smart dialogue choices or intriguing characters, yeah, it could work. It could. And frankly, from a business perspective as well, right? Imagine your paradox here. You have put probably quite a bit of money into this project. You've hired a lot of the original artists and then fired them just as quickly again, which was a little bit of the problem. And you've paid a studio already quite a bit of money to try and make this, and they've failed. Your option then is, okay, do you want probably a bad game rushed out in a year? Or do you want a much smaller game rushed out within the original time slot, but which might actually have a hope of being good? Honestly, I'd probably take the latter myself. It would be annoying in a way if we get a game and it is actually good and it's short, because it kind of reminds you of everything you could have had, but at the same time, having seen the original, yeah, there was no unpolished gemstone there. It was simply just a turd in a promising package, and that's it. Well, best of luck to the Chinese room. Honestly, I would love to see a good Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2. No matter how unfathomably doubtful I am of that outcome. Fingers crossed and all that. Until next time, I've been Arch, thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.